All right, guys, so before we get into learning Tailwind CSS, I just want to briefly talk about what it is and some of its advantages. Because in the world of web development, we're constantly blasted with different frameworks and technologies, so we should discuss if they're worth using and what they can do for us. So Tailwind is a CSS framework that uses very low-level utility classes to create layouts. And it's known as what's called a utility-first framework. And in this video, we're going to do quite a bit of comparison with Bootstrap just because it's the most popular CSS framework. It's been around for a while, and most other frameworks are very similar to Bootstrap. So you can just replace the word Bootstrap with Foundation or Materialize or any other framework. So frameworks like Bootstrap give you a set of classes where many of them correlate directly to components like alerts, nav bars, cards, etc., where Tailwind, on the other hand, gives you a huge set of utilities or utility classes to create your own custom components. So it's very unopinionated. There's no alert class with a predefined design or anything like that. You decide what an alert looks like with the utilities that you're given. So to be more specific, utility classes are simple HTML classes typically scoped to a single and specific CSS property. Whereas with something like Bootstrap, you could have a class that represents a dozen or more different CSS properties. So let's just take a look at this example here. So we have a div that has a class of maxWXL. So this is a class that handles the max width. It doesn't handle anything else, just that. And the XL is the size, which references a certain number of rems or pixels. And you can actually customize what that size is from the configuration. So MX Auto references the margin on the x-axis. So we're saying the right and left margin, and we're setting it to auto, which is usually used to center the element. And then P2 is a padding class. It means padding all around, and that too represents a certain number of rems or pixels, which again can be changed. So the H2 has a class of text2XL, and that pertains to the font size. Font bold, obviously that's the font weight. And then we have a class of MB2, that's margin bottom. All right, so in all these classes, they're named according to their purpose. So it's very clear, it's easy to remember, you know exactly what these classes do. There's no naming inconsistencies, and having these utilities available allows for very fast UI creation. And if you want to test certain things out and change things around, it's extremely easy to do, and you can do it really quickly. So in some cases, you know, this gets rid of the need for design software like Figma or you know, Adobe XD or something, because you can do it so quickly within the browser, and that's really what I love about Tailwind. Now the downside is that people seem to complain that there's a lot of classes in the HTML, and that's true. However, you can create custom classes and use certain directives like apply to apply the classes from within a custom CSS file if you really want to clean up the number of classes in your HTML. And I'll show you how to do all that stuff later. All right, now I don't want to sound like I'm bashing Bootstrap. I really like Bootstrap. I've used it for years. I have a course on it. I think having the ability to quickly create predefined components is great for a lot of projects. And I'm not saying that Tailwind is better or worse than Bootstrap or any other framework for that matter. This is a Tailwind course, so I am going to try to outline the advantages. But just know that I'm not saying that anything is better or worse. So I just want to look at some differences here, though. So Tailwind was released in, I believe it was 2017, and it's a relatively new framework compared to Bootstrap that was released in 2011. So in the field, you're probably going to run into Bootstrap more than Tailwind. However, Tailwind is gaining a lot of traction. Now, as we talked about, Tailwind uses low-level classes or utility classes for fast UI development, and Bootstrap uses higher-level component-based classes, and it does offer some utility classes as well. So Tailwind has more flexibility and uniqueness because it's so unopinionated. In many cases, Bootstrap sites can look very similar, especially when the developer doesn't even bother to configure anything, any colors or anything like that. So Tailwind is customizable. You have directives and functions you can use. There's also a Tailwind CLI to set up your environment. We're going to get into that in a little bit. You can also install it as a post-CSS plugin if you're using something like Webpack. And Bootstrap is also customizable through Sass, so you can change different variables for colors and so on. Tailwind is a bit more difficult, I would say. I feel like to use Bootstrap, you don't need to know that much CSS. You just need to remember the classes, where with Tailwind, the classes essentially are the CSS properties. So you really have to understand, for instance, Flexbox in order to use the Flex classes, more so than Bootstrap columns or whatever. And then, of course, we have the fact that many Tailwind sites do have a ton of HTML classes. Bootstrap uses higher level classes, so of course you're going to have less of them. So another awesome thing about Tailwind is the dynamic or conditional classes for things like responsive design in different states. So if we look at this example here, we have a div with the class of Flex, which is just display Flex. That's all this is doing here. And then we're setting the Flex direction to a column with the class of Flex call. But then we're saying on medium screens and up, we actually want it to be a Flex row, which is a horizontal row. Okay, so it's rare that we have to write custom media queries because we have these responsive classes for different widths. We have small, medium, large, extra large, and you can even create your own. So we can also add classes based on the state of an element. For instance, here we're saying to make the text color blue if the link is hovered over. So that class won't take effect until it's actually has a hover state. So this stuff makes Tailwind very powerful and makes it so we rarely ever have to leave the HTML for styling. All right, guys, so enough with the slides. We're going to get into our environment setup, and then we'll start learning more about Tailwind, and then we'll start to create some cool projects. All right, guys, so I'm going to go over our environment, which is very, very simple. When we're working with Tailwind, we're just working with HTML and CSS. We'll write a little bit of front-end JavaScript, but that's about it. Now, as far as the text editor you use, that's completely up to you. I personally would recommend VS Code for just about anything, really, these days, any language. It's very, very popular. It's very intuitive. It has great extensions. It's easy to use. It has an integrated terminal. The list just goes on. So it's definitely a piece of software that I simp for big time. So I would recommend that. It's cross-platform. You're also going to need to install Node.js on your system if you don't have it already. And the reason for that is we're going to be using the Node Package Manager to install Tailwind and some other packages as well. I'm going to give you an example of using Tailwind with Webpack. So you will need Node installed. I'm sure that a lot of you already have it installed, but if you don't, just go ahead and download it. Go through the installer. It's very simple. And then you're going to need Git as well. You should be using Git. Now, these projects are pretty simple, so if you don't use it for version control, that's okay. But we will be deploying to Netlify. We're going to be deploying to a service called Vercel. And to deploy to both of those, we need to first push to GitHub. So we will need Git for that. And that's about it for actual programs that you need on your machine. Now, when it comes to VS Code, there are a few extensions that I'm running that I would recommend. So one would be Live Server, and if you use VS Code, I'm sure you know what Live Server is. It basically just allows you to run any HTML file on just a local development server, and it hot reloads, so anytime you make a change, it will update and make the change as well. So we'll be using that all throughout the course. And then there is a Tailwind right here, Tailwind CSS IntelliSense. So I would suggest adding this. It'll show you like the available classes, even though in most cases we'll be using Emmet, which I'll talk about next. But yeah, so this I would recommend. It gives you certain highlights and stuff. So get that installed. And then also this post CSS language support. When we use directives, there's something called directives in Tailwind. By default, you're going to get some squiggly lines with an error message. If you install this post CSS language support plugin, then it's not going to show those squiggly lines, and it also gives you some other functionality too when it comes to Post CSS. So I would recommend that. Prettier as a code formatter, that's something that I use. It's really up to you if you want to use it. And then, yeah, I'm pretty sure that's it. Auto rename tag. So if you change the ending tag, like header to div or something, it'll change the other one as well. But other than that, the extensions you use are completely up to you. Now, if you're not familiar with Emmet, I'm sure most of you are, but if you're not, it's a tool that allows you to write HTML a little faster, and it comes standard with VS Code, but if you're using another text editor like, let's say, Atom, I think that you have to install it as a plugin or as an extension. I don't think it comes automatically. So one thing it will do is just, if I want an H1 beginning and ending tag, I could just do H1 enter, and the same goes for any element. And if I want to put a class on, I could just do, let's say, dot text dash XL. If I hit enter, that'll automatically give me a div with that class. If I wanted an H1 with the class of text dash whatever 3XL, hit enter, it'll give me an H1 with that class. So I will be using Emmet quite a bit, and there'll even be cases where I want to have, like, let's say 10 divs with the text inside of item 1. So I might do something like this, div. We can open up some curly braces and say item and then number sign, and then I could do multiply that by 10, hit enter, and then I get 10 divs. Okay, so I think it's better than typing it all out. Now the downside is, if you're using the Tailwind extension, you don't get the helpers to, the class names don't pop up, the IntelliSense. So it's really up to you on if you want to use Emmet or not. I will be, so I just want to kind of let you know that. Also, one thing that can surprise people is when we do write some JavaScript, there's very little, but we will be doing some JavaScript. I don't use semicolons. I also always use single quotes, just to let you know. So if you want to add semicolons, that's absolutely fine. I tend not to use them in JavaScript. But other than that, I really can't think of anything else. As far as my configuration goes, I guess we could take a look. Actually, let's look at the JSON settings. So if we do a Command-Shift-P, and if you just search for JSON and you go to your JSON settings, so my font size is 18, just so you guys can see it. The terminal size is bigger too, wherever that is, right here, terminal, that's also 18. I don't have format on save, so I do have that set to true, format on save. I don't have auto save enabled. I'm using word wrap. My tab size I have set to 2. And I don't think any of this other stuff, none of this other stuff really matters. So live server, Emmet, Tailwind, plugin, Post CSS, that's pretty much it as far as my text editor environment. All right, so let's get on to the next video.